All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren, your host. I'm also a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here in San Diego. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a very difficult subject, and that's of losing a child. It's something that nobody really wants to talk about. I think it's really important to talk about because it's much more common than you would expect. It's every parent's worst nightmare to lose their child. But if statistics are true, as many as 1 in 4 families experience a loss, whether it's of a child that's already been born or miscarrying. And on today's episode, I've brought on Megan Hillukka. She is a grieving, bereaved mom herself. She's a mom of 6, and 5 are still with us here. But she's going to share not only her own experience of grief and loss and sadness, but also how she was able to, one, move through it herself, and the work that she's doing with other moms now. She's created support networks. She's created programs for other moms that are going through the same thing, having lost a child. And so I will say that in sharing her story about losing her daughter, it can be very triggering. So just be forewarned, I guess, is that this subject can be very difficult. And if it is something that you're not ready to listen to, then please take care of yourself. But she gives a lot of amazing tools, amazing perspectives that I think can really help not only grieving moms, but also those of us that may have a friend or a family member going through that. We might not have experienced the loss ourselves, but we want to do the best to support a loved one that is having that process or having that problem right now of grieving and figuring out how to carry that grief. So I will turn over now to our conversation. She has a lot of links and support things that are in the show notes. Please reach out to her or to her groups for support if you're finding you needing that help right away. But now let me turn over to my conversation with Megan about carrying the grief of losing a child. All right, Megan, thank you for being here. Thanks for being on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. Thanks for having me on here, Dr. J. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here. I mean, one, your story of where you've come from from having lost a child, and to the work you've come to do for other parents, I think is so, one, I admire you for it. So I want to thank you for that. But then also like what you're doing for other parents is why I think it's such an important conversation to have on the podcast. I mean, a lot of times like this podcast is talking about like new babies and birth and maybe some difficulties in postpartum and the like, but nothing like what you've experienced in losing a child, which is, I think, every parent's worst nightmare. And you're a mother of 6, and 5 are still with you. And your daughter, Aria, is who you lost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how old was she when she passed?
Aria was 15 months old.
15 months.
Yep. It's been almost 5 years. And I was 36 weeks pregnant with my next child.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And was she your oldest? Or
she was our third.
The third.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think in the course of our conversation, I want to talk about like, that instead of it just being your only child or even a miscarriage, but then having other siblings, like experiencing that, I think is so important. And so 36 months pregnant and then losing your 15-month-old, like what was going on and what happened, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. So I was 36 weeks pregnant, due in a month for my next daughter, my 4th child. And Aria died in the night. She was 15 months old. There's no cause, no reason. It's called sudden unexplained death in childhood, similar to SIDS, but once they turn a year old, it's sudden
No
unexpected
longer
death
SIDS.
happened.
Okay.
And I found her in the morning, and obviously just a shock. It's not something you expect. And I think that's why this kind of conversation is so important, especially in a podcast that talks a lot about babies. Even though it can be so hard, it can be such a, like, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to think about it, that this could happen, but this happens way more often than we would like it to.
Mm-hmm.
And having these kind of conversations to, number one, support people who are grieving, who have lost a child, who have gone through this horrific thing, and just really like, okay, you're not alone. And that, how do we normalize this conversation of grief and loss? Like I did not expect it like anybody else. You don't expect this to happen to you.
No.
You don't expect to be burying your child. And there's so many questions that come up of like, why our child, why our daughter, why did this happen to us? Like this happens to other people. This doesn't happen to us, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the feeling I think we all have, because we really don't want to even think about it, that it would happen to us.
No, of course not. And is it something, so I want to talk about the work you're doing with parents, but like in the moment before when you're experiencing this, what were the most like helpful things you found in those like days and weeks and months afterwards?
Right after she died, I guess there's a lot of helpful things. I had a lot of support, amazing support from friends and family, which I know community and having that support is super helpful when somebody is grieving. But for me, it was really giving myself that permission to grieve, giving myself the time and the space to actually grieve, to get the help that I needed, to spend time with my grief, and really acknowledging that if I wanted to learn how to live again, I had to do this work. It's like diving into the work, taking the time for it, making space for it. And then something I always offer to moms when I talk to them, or people who have just, lost somebody or are grieving, is like, and this is what I did, was like narrow my focus to like, you might say like trying to get through the next week. And when you're grieving the loss of your child, you might just be trying to get through the next minute.
Yeah.
It really goes down to like the next second, the next minute, and just bringing your focus to that moment. Because as soon as you start to look at your whole life ahead of you, it gets really depressing. It gets really hopeless. And like, I can't live the rest of my life this way. But if you can bring it down to, I just need to get through the next minute, the next day, the next week, whatever you can handle, it just helps you not project into the future because you don't know what you're going to be like in a year or 2 years or 10 years. So just being, okay, this is where I am, and this is where I can start to take steps forward from this moment.
Right. And you said, did you have like a wide community of support already and friends and family, or was that something that you really needed to create after this?
Yeah, I was very lucky to have, like, I have a very large church community and my friends and my family. But then aside from that, I went to therapy and sought that kind of support as well. We went to support groups, and as time has gone on, I've invested in coaching and different like memberships and places where I can get different tools and resources to learn many different management skills and coping skills and all of these different things. But I did have a big community, which I'm so grateful for, because they helped in so many ways.
Right. Did you find there was people within the community though, like friends and families, that just like you didn't either relate to anymore, or maybe you felt from them like discomfort is kind of a small word compared to what you're going through, but just didn't know what to do?
Yeah, I definitely went more internal and like kind of, even though I had a lot of people I could rely on, I had a few smaller group. Like I preferred smaller group. I preferred to be with just my really close friends, because I felt like everywhere I went, I had a big sign on my head that said, "My child died, don't talk to me." And like, I know that I probably felt awkward. Other people didn't really know what to say to me. like there was this dynamic for a really long time where I felt like that's all people could see when they looked at me.
Mm.
And that's all I could think about when I tried to talk to somebody else. And it was just like, I don't even know how to have these conversations with people anymore.
Right.
So it was really, really relying and talking to my really close friends and family who, like, I knew I could have those conversations. I knew that I could laugh and they didn't think that I was over it. You know, they didn't think that I was moving on, or I knew that I could laugh with them. I could cry with them. I could talk about Aria. I could talk about normal, everyday other things. And they weren't just like, oh, you're getting over it. Good thing, you know, like it is an awkward time. It really was. And I don't know how you make it better besides you just being okay with that you're grieving and not letting other people's expectations of what you are going through,
right,
change your grief journey.
Thankfully, there's only been a few families in my own practice that have lost children, thankfully, because we don't want anyone to suffer through that. But all of them have said like that, it especially in the first time, everything is awkward. And it's so like you're searching for comfort in something and nothing's there. And it's not like chit-chatting like, oh my gosh, I just need a break from it. I don't want to talk about it. But then when you are, you're like, I can't do small talk. I can't do that. And then when you are wanting to talk about it, you might be feeling like, oh, do they want to talk about it? And I can understand like why you would want to kind of hole up and find that crew.
Yeah, because there is so many emotions. And then there is that aspect of like people in your life who, like a lot of people say, you find out who your true friends are. That like people in your life disappear. They all of a sudden, maybe somebody who you thought would be there for you all of a sudden isn't. And I think it's just really helpful to focus on the people who are there for you, who are, somebody who you can talk to and rely on, because it can be really easy to focus on the people who aren't helping or aren't there in the way that you'd want them to. And then it gets really depressing when you start to focus on that.
Right. And is that something like, one of the things I love about your work that I kind of gravitated right towards you is the wording of carrying grief rather than getting rid of grief or moving through grief. And I think that concept, like I've came up with or wanted to move into that because of what you're talking about with the friends and people that allowed you to be who you were at that moment, whether it was talking about it or not talking about it. Can you explain for the listeners what you mean by that, carrying the grief? Because I think that's a really important concept in healing. Yeah,
I always talk about carrying grief versus suffering with grief, because so often if we want to say, you're like, oh yeah, I don't want to live this way forever, but getting rid of grief or, healing, quote unquote, healing grief is like, I'm moving on, I'm forgetting. And as a mom, you're like, I don't want to move on. I don't want to forget. So you like, it's almost like your whole body fights that idea. And you're like, no, you reject everything about that. Is like, I'm not interested in moving on. I'm not interested in healing. I'm not interested in forgetting. And the carrying grief is what I help moms do is it's imagine like you're bringing some tools and things underneath your body to help you carry the grief that you have. So the grief that we have after our child dies is with us forever. And right away we fight it. We don't want it to be there. We suffer with the grief. We have a lot of guilt and anger and a lot of turmoil that is added on top of grief. So grief itself is already painful. Grief is so intense, but then we add so much suffering on top of it with our thoughts, with our emotions, with our actions, everything on top of that. So now we're not just carrying grief, we're suffering with it. So when we take away the suffering, we can learn to come underneath it and carry it where it's a part of our lives, where it's not a bad thing, where it's not something we need to get rid of, where it's something that you can be okay with where you're at with, like, you know what, it's just really hard right now. And that's okay. I don't need to change it. I don't need to be somewhere different than I am. It's just accepting where you're at the moment, and then knowing that grief cycles, grief comes and goes, grief comes in waves. And when that wave comes, you're not fighting it. You just let it come, and you know that it's also going to leave. And that is what the whole essence of carrying grief is, being able to carry both grief and joy. And so you know that you're walking with grief the rest of your life, but you also make space for joy and lighter emotions, because when we're suffering with grief, we think that I can't have any joy. I can't have a beautiful life. It's not possible to live again, because if I did, that means I'm a bad mom, because I'm moving on and forgetting. But when you know that you're never going to forget, you know that you're never moving on. You don't have to at all. Yeah. You can have both grief and joy. And when you can carry those together, it has changed my life in a way that I have so much hope and so much joy for my future and so much joy in my life. But I also have grief. I'm carrying my grief. And as I learn to carry it, my legs get stronger, my body gets stronger, my everything surrounding grief. I hope that makes sense. It's just like being able to carry the grief in a way that doesn't cause suffering.
Right. I think that's so important, because that's not what our culture does around any kind of trauma. It's get over it, move past it. And of course, it's coming from a place of wanting to help so that you're not in the suffering, right? Mm-hmm. But especially in this case of feeling guilty about moving past it and forgetting and not honoring, and really when it even comes down to it too, of like, all right, that's just not how it is. Like, it's not gone. So if you can be in a space of, all right, the goal isn't to have it be gone, because when it really never is, then you're not, those expectations aren't being upended. But then I like what you talk about in the carrying the grief. Then, like, if your job then is to carry it, or the focus is to carry it, how do I carry it? Then it's a strengthening. Mm-hmm. As you said, like, your legs and your arms become stronger to carry that. And that means the tools that you're learning and the community that you're supporting or being supported by. Mm-hmm. Did you find, so I'm curious about your older children too. The process that they went through, or that you're going through your own grief, and then you have your children as well. Like, how did they manage it?
Yeah, we did not do this without support and help. We also took them to play therapy, and they were 4 and 2.5, so they were pretty young as well. But they totally saw her. They were there with me, when I found her in the morning, and we took them to play therapy for kind of I don't remember how long, but I think that was very helpful. And also, like, the play therapist could explain to me more about how kids are, how kids heal, how you can help kids. So often we think of kids as like, kids are resilient, like they're going to be fine. And that's something like I worried about so much, was like, my kids are so young. How come they have to know such a horrific trauma and grief at such a young age? And I really wanted to help them. And I think that it's very important to, even if kids are quote unquote resilient, to give them the tools and to help them process, because we don't always know what's going on inside of a child's mind, and they don't always know how to express what they're feeling or what they're thinking. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that looked like really providing the space to talk. So often, like, I kind of wanted to force it. I wanted to be like, hey, do you remember this day? And what do you remember about it? Right. And that didn't work. It didn't work for me to bring it up. It had to be like when it came up for my child, especially my oldest. Like, and I found that when I was driving in the car, which normally was like my time to listen to something, have my kids just ride. Yeah. But that's the time he wanted to talk. And so I started shutting off all my stuff and just having that space to, like, if it came up, if he wanted to talk, that he could. And so I think that there is such a balance between trying to grieve yourself and then raising grieving children. So often, many of the moms I talk with and work with are like, they want to provide for their children first. And they want to support their children first, which is what we all want to do. Of course, we want to help our kids. But in that manner, then they don't let themselves grieve. Yeah. And they pretend, they have to be the strong one, and they pretend that everything's okay with them. And what I found is really, I needed to support myself so that I could be there for my kids, because I was caring for myself, because I was grieving in the way that I did need to, when my kids needed that time and space, I could give it to them. And I wasn't triggered by like what came up, because so many times kids they say things that are really painful. They might do things, especially because they play out a lot of what happened. Like they would like replay the scenario. And as a mom, you're like, oh, don't do that. You don't want them to do that. And then you're like, okay, this is the way that they process. This is the way that they're working through what happened. And so I didn't feel that need to go stop them, because I knew that it was a good thing for them to work through it. I really believe for me that it was taking care of myself was one of the best ways I could help my kids. And there was so many things that did come up. And what I really realized is you do not understand what kids are thinking. When my son, so we were kind of a long story, but we were having another baby. And because my daughter died 4 weeks before a baby was born, we were having another baby. And he told my husband that, well, now that we're having another baby, Winston, the next baby, has to die before the next baby can be born, right? And to him, like, we had no idea he was thinking that.
Right.
But to him, that was what had happened. That was the natural, quote unquote, natural order. This is what happens.
Yeah, in a 4-year-old's brain, like that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just being able to, like, I was so glad he was able to communicate that. And then we were able to go back into play therapy so he could work through it again. Yeah. So he worked through that, processed it. And she had said that she could see a huge difference in his anxiety or body language from before baby was born to after. Like, he came in after and was like, our baby was born and my brother didn't even die. Like, just like, whoa, this is like it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. Wow. And that's just amazing. I mean, just to think of a 4-year-old carrying that in these last weeks of a pregnancy, of like, oh my gosh, that's what happens to babies. And then being stressed about that. Oh, that's just heartbreaking. But for you to be able to be present with that and to hear it and to work with it is just incredible. What about for you and your husband? What was it like for you two going through this process together?
Very intense, very, very intense time. And I think because of the what do you say, the statistics, or what people always say is like a high percentage of marriages end after a child dies. And
I've read those stats. That's why I was curious. Yeah,
I've heard that. And I was actually told by our therapist that those statistics are more for marriages that were already on the rocks before that happened, because it's not actually as high as we make it out to be. But I do know that it happens a lot. And I know that it was a very intense time, especially the first year. I was diagnosed with PTSD. And then my husband felt like he had to try to keep our whole family together. So he kind of became that quote unquote rock that he wasn't able to, process anything of his own, really, because I was falling apart. I was like, traumatized. I was grieving everything else. And so was he. But then trying to connect and communicate when you're both on such different pages. And then when you have trauma, it's already hard to connect with people. It's hard to feel love. It's hard to feel anything besides panic and stress. And so trying to connect was just like my husband had told me that he didn't love this person who was here anymore. He didn't know if he could. And I'm really grateful that we have this belief that we're married for the rest of our lives. So we're able to, like, okay, right now, he thought maybe this is the rest of his life is going to be this way, but we were able to work through it. And I was able to heal my trauma. And then we just kept trying to communicate. So we weren't communicating for so long. It felt like anytime we had a conversation, it was just more frustrating. It was like, we're not on the same page. But when you keep trying and you keep trying and you keep trying and you keep coming back to the table again, is like, what is the most important? We want to be able to love each other. We want to be a connected unit for our family. And as I got quote unquote better, as my trauma healed, and I was able to, I guess it's not even just me, it was both of us being able to communicate and have really, really hard conversations. Like, I think it forced us to have conversations that we would have never had if this didn't happen to us. And it really forced us to be able to communicate on such a deep level that I'm so grateful for the marriage we have today. Like, it is so beautiful, so connected, and we have the ability to have those hard conversations. But it was very trying. He grieved differently. He's a lot more internal griever, and I'm an external griever. And I was like, I wanted him to tell me everything. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about Aria, and he just didn't tell me anything. I'm like, I get frustrated. Like, how come you're not sad? How come you're not grieving? And he's like, I am. He told me, like, one time he got pretty mad at me, and he's like, I am grieving. Just because I'm not showing it on the outside does not mean I don't feel it on the inside. And for me, that was a big eye opener of, he's grieving in his own way. He loved her just as much as I did and do. And there's no way I should be judging his grief, just like I wouldn't want him to judge mine. And so it's really taken a lot to be able to get to, where we are, but it's so worth the work and so worth having those really, really tough conversations.
Right. Well, I mean, the kind of cliche is, which I don't find it is true, is like time heals all wounds, and time going by does help, but it's like doing the work during that time allows enough time to go by that you can get to those deeper conversations, the deeper healing, deeper grieving that allows it to happen. And because you guys had that belief and that strength together, you were able to ride through those initial hard times were just not happening, not connected, don't know who you are, to go to the other side. And I would imagine like a lot of the parents or the moms you're working with in your group are probably going through the similar things, whether that's with a spouse, but that just helping them identify like where they are on the scale of things. Tell us more about like this group that you've created to support grieving moms.
Yeah, I'll talk about that, but I really wanted to kind of touch on that time. Okay. Because there's a thing that I always talk about, because people will be like, time, just give it time. And I was like, time doesn't really matter as much as like, because somebody who has lost their child 20 years ago can be in the same exact spot as somebody who just lost their child a month ago. I'm always like, time doesn't matter. Time just keeps marching on. It's what you do with the time that counts. Okay. And that is, like, especially with grief, like a way that if you do the grief work, the sooner you start allowing yourself to process and feel, the more time helps. But otherwise, time is just passing. Right. So I just wanted to touch on that.
No, because that's perfect.
It's such an important thing.
Absolutely.
And so you're talking about like my Facebook group?
Yeah. You've created a group, a community to support each other, and you're leading that. So tell us more about that group.
So I have a free Facebook group. It's called, now I can't even remember. If you go to
Grieving
Facebook,
Moms Community.
with Megan Hillukka.
Megan Hillukka, right.
If you go to facebook.com/group/cultivated family, that's where you'll be able to find it. Okay. But it's a free group for grieving moms specifically. I screen everybody that comes in and make sure that they are a grieving mom. And it's really just a place where I post a lot of, my goal with it is, yes, to provide community and support and a place for moms to feel not alone, but also a way to really have moms start thinking about things on a deeper level, a place to share their experiences, but also like processing on a deeper level rather than just a place of support. So I post a lot of questions of like, do you feel like you need more people around you, or do you have you been more external, like needing the support from people, or have you been going internal, like kind of separating yourself, like helping? And I've had many moms comment like, it's so nice to have those kind of questions so that they can start to realize, okay, what do I need? What do I need on my grief journey? Do I need more people around me? Do I need to ask for help? Am I putting too much on myself? And do I need to, be like, okay, I need to ask for help now, or whatever it is, of all these different questions that I that I ask. And it's really a place for moms to begin to have a community, but also begin to learn tools to be able to carry their grief, like I
Right.
talk.
And supporting them in carrying their grief rather than supporting them in the suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really because support groups, they are amazing. They can be, but they can so easily go down to a place of complaining, of the suffering, of focusing on all the horrific things of that cycle. And my goal is to really help moms not go down that cycle. I want to be a place of encouragement, hope, and support, and where we can talk about grief, we can talk about the realities of it, but we can also talk about hope. We can talk about ways of, it's for moms who don't want to stop living, who are like, I feel like my life stopped. I don't know how to keep going, but I want to learn how to live. And I want to learn how to do this. I just don't know how.
Right. And as you said, I mean, support groups can be amazing, but a lot of times what happens in any support group, whether it's for a life occurrence or a disease or something, that you get kind of stuck in identifying yourself with that thing. And in this case, like obviously you're going to be a bereaved mother always, but there's process through it. So being able to have action tools and things like that. And I mean, you've created a little course about that as well, right? To help spur those things on. What is the structure of that?
Yeah. So my mini program is called Stop Talking, Start Feeling. And it's all about this, especially going to therapy, which is also amazing. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but we go to therapy and we talk and talk and talk and talk, and we forget to take a step back and begin to feel our experiences, our emotions. And I truly believe that in order to be able to take any steps forward, being able to carry our grief, we have to learn how to feel the emotions of grief. We have to learn how to process them. And so in this mini program, it has 3 sections. The first section is just like a presentation on emotions, on thoughts, a different way of thinking about emotions, so they're not so scary. Because we're like, if I feel sadness, I'm just like, I have to keep busy because I don't want to feel sad, because if I get sad, I'm going to be depressed and go down into a deep dark hole and I'm never going to come out. And so really giving you tools to understand what emotions are and how to process them so that they're not so scary. Because if you feel that, like that fear about that emotion, of course you're not going to feel it. Of course you're going to fight it. But it's when we're fighting emotion, you're still feeling that emotion, but then you're fighting it. But then when you can kind of embrace the emotion and not fight it and really take away that resistance, it gets so much lighter. And it's not until you do this work and practice that you see how much easier it gets when you stop resisting that emotion. And so that's what the program, the first section is that. And then the other 2 sections is for guilt and sadness. And those are the specific tools of like EFT videos, that's tapping for sadness, for guilt, and then guided meditations and stuff that really help you go inside your body and experience the emotion physically in a way that doesn't, like moms will say, like, you know, it's so helpful to like bring it up, but they say when they're by themselves, they bring it up and then they don't know what to do with it. They're like, oh my goodness, now I feel this emotion. And then they panic and they're like, I don't know what to do. But when you do this meditation or this EFT videos, you bring it up. And then by the time you are at the end of it, it calms down and you help process and it like goes away. So it's not just bringing it up. It's okay. Now you brought it up. Now, how do you process it and work through it? So your whole day isn't, you know, collapsed because of that emotion.
Right. And I think that's, I mean, especially in this culture where we're so afraid of negative emotion, is because we don't have tools to work with those things. So bringing it up means just kind of opening up a wound and then having to wait for it to heal, rather than it being something of, you know, I always think of the Robert Frost quote of the only way out is through. where you need to be like in it
Mm-hmm.
in order to lift yourself or
Mm-hmm.
be lifted out of it. And I don't know how exactly you use it in your program, but I know tapping or EFT can be a fantastic way of breaking patterns, and your
Mm-hmm.
guided imagery, I'm sure, is really fantastic
Mm-hmm.
as well. I'll have links, like one to the group and then also to your site to be able to check out that program. But in our last couple of minutes here, kind of two questions. One is for like a mom going through what you've gone through, the loss of a child. Like what's some advice that you would give to them right now, if they found this episode and are needing help, as you're saying, wanting to move through?
Mm-hmm. The biggest thing, I guess, especially if you're newly grieving, but anywhere on your grief journey, is give yourself grace and space to grieve. Like, we are the hardest and the most judgmental on ourselves of we're grieving incorrectly, we're not doing it right, all these things. It's just like coming back to giving yourself love and compassion and knowing that you're going through one of the hardest things you'll ever go through.
Right.
And then from that place, you don't need to do this all alone. Like, you don't have to be the strong one. You don't have to keep busy. You don't have to try to do all these things that we do that really keep us on this like hamster wheel of just like exhaustion and trying to keep everything together when you don't need to. You can get help. You can find support. Even if people in your life aren't supportive, there are people like the work I do, but not even just my work. There's therapists, there are support groups, there are other things and people that can help you, that can support you. And even if it feels hopeless, I hope that you can see the shining light from me, that there is hope, that there is possibility of life after loss, even if like you don't have to forget or move on from your child to have life after loss, and that there's so much hope for you.
Right. What about for like the last question is for those people that may have someone in their life that's lost a child and is going through that process. And I've found this episode to like try and be that helpful person and a true friend, rather than erring on the side of like, let me just give them space. Like, what would you recommend to them, to be able to support a mom going through this experience?
There's so many things, but the first thing is don't err on the side of giving them space, because we so often, I know this feeling because I felt it myself too, before Aria died. I know what I was like before she died, but like, you're so scared to say the wrong thing that you like disappear. And the worst thing you can do is go silent or disappear, because you are leaving them in the most difficult time of their life. And it doesn't go unnoticed. They will notice. You might think like, oh, they're not going to notice. They will. I can guarantee that.
Okay.
But the other thing is like, yeah, you might say the wrong thing. You might do the wrong thing, but it's better to be there than to disappear. Okay. And then the biggest thing I would say is don't try to fix their loss or their grief. Don't say you don't need to, if your sentence starts with at least, you just stop, because people will say like, at least you have another child. At least you got them for 15 months. At least you got them for whatever your at least is. Just stop, because in that moment you are invalidating their pain and their grief, and you're trying to fix it. And child loss and their grief is not quote unquote fixable. It's something that needs to be carried, and it's something that they will learn in their own time. You cannot come in and change their grief journey. The only thing you can do, which is so hard, is to support them in the way that they need support, to be there, to be a listening ear, to be a safe space for them to grieve with, and really like helping them in the way that obviously is best for you, because I don't like to be on the receiving end of help that is given grudgingly. You want it to be given freely. So you want to give in the ways that you can give. Maybe you're not a listening ear for somebody, but maybe you're somebody who can bring food, or maybe you're somebody who can come and clean their house. Whatever it is for you, do that thing. And the only thing you can do then is hope that they take that help. And if they don't want it, then don't be offended that they didn't want it. You just did the best you could and you offered the help. And if they didn't want it, don't take offense. Just be like, okay, I guess that wasn't the best thing for you, and that's okay.
Right. Great. Thank you for that. And, in closing, you had said just a couple of minutes ago that your hope was that you can be that light and inspiration for someone to move through it. And I absolutely think that you are. I mean, you've embodied that, like carrying the grief and not trying to eliminate it. And you're also doing all of this amazing work for other moms to help them through too. So thank you for being here today and sharing your story. I know it's not easy, but I know this is something you're really committed to. And I appreciate you being here to help so many other people that may be listening to this. So thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a joy to talk about grief, which is such a weird thing to say, but
right.
It's such an important topic. So I appreciate you being open to having, a harder conversation, which can bring up a lot of pain for a lot of people. And it's also something that's so important. So thanks for having me.
And don't forget, I have 2 free offers for both moms and dads. First, for the moms, I have my 40 ways of connecting with your baby during pregnancy that you can get on my website at drjwarren.com/40 ways. That's 40 ways. And for the dads, I have the 9 myths about becoming a dad that is also available on my site at drjwarren.com/9 myths. That's the number 9 myths. So both moms and dads are covered. Go check them out. I hope you enjoy them.